Today's topic is one of my favorite topics, and I'm thrilled to have Ryan Todd with me to discuss it. It's using technology as a multiplier and not as a fix for broken processes. So I can't wait to talk to you about this, Ryan. Ryan's well known in our industry. He's one of my favorite capital markets, technology persons, and I'm thrilled to have him today. He's currently Chief Capital Markets at V.I.P, but prior to that, a long history within the mortgage space. So, Ryan, let's get on to this topic because I see it so often today where the thrill of the moment is on talking about AI and how that's going to increase our sales and how this is going to make a fantastic difference in our results. But is it really starting out with the right thinking, which is if I add more technology, that hopefully this is going to change results? So start off with your big picture.
Yeah, and thank you for having me. I absolutely love this topic, especially because
Mhm.
I've kind of waited my whole career for us to kind of be in this moment, right? Because we've been waiting for technology to
Yeah.
reach this point. But one, when I'm having conversations with other, industry leaders, this topic is coming up a lot because
Mhm.
for reasons you just mentioned, right? And there's a lot of, shiny new objects and stuff
Yes.
like that. So as we kind of work to be productive with some of these new tools, ROI needs to be a big part of that conversation. A big part of, what I try to advise to people is look at implementation as the starting
Mhm.
point, not the finish line, right? So as we implement these new software, I mean, a lot of them are very costly. So it's important that implementation goes well. And then when we do implement the software, it's not set it and forget it. It's continue to tune the model, continue to provide that feedback loop so you're tweaking those over time.
So Ryan, let's talk about you hit on one of my favorite points is that we in other words want to overlay to a work process. And I think they've certainly have tried to do it on the back side, on the front side also. But you're talking about overlaying a technology, AI or whatever, any of those features, to the reality of if it doesn't get implemented by the loan officers, it's rather kind of somewhat worthless on the front side. And on the other end, on the back side, you have more control as a lender. So what would you recommend? Always go to the back side because you can kind of control it better. And then the front side is where there's really power, but we don't seem to be able to require the people to use the great technology that we have.
That's a great point, and really, right, whether it's on the back end on operations
Yeah.
or whether on the front end on the sales, right? Adoption is always going to be key, right? So I love, the topic of the back end operations improvements because while it's not directly impactful, or is visually impactful to the sales teams, it's very impactful on their cost to produce, how
Hmm.
how lenders compete on rates, and when you see the cost to produce studies, it's really all over the map, right? And it's
Hmm.
you got to
Hmm.
start scratching your head. It's like, oh, wow, these the guys that are really on the lower end of the cost to produce spectrum, right? How are they getting that? And we know how they're getting it, right? They're doing that with the appropriate tools and to your point, appropriate adoption. So
So, if you're a sales leader, let's start from the beginning. And so let's look at technology on the back side of it, of our lenders. And what's the first step they need to do, really, versus being sold by a vendor that this is going to change your results. And all of a sudden, you're going to be super happy with doing all kinds of numbers of loans per person. So, what's that first step that they need to do?
well, I think kind of before the first step, right, is
Yeah,
one
true.
of the observations I've seen is almost technology is like a checklist item, right?
Yeah,
So it's like,
true.
do you have this, right? And
Hmm.
and really when you're on the sales side, the name of the technology is almost become agnostic for the results they're trying to achieve, right?
Sure. Hmm.
So, what we want smooth, fast process, right? We want efficient, repeatable, all of those things, right? So as we start to kind of plug in these vendors, these
Hmm.
software solutions, right, we need to stop asking so much like, do we have the checklist item and are we getting the results that we need? Because you could have all of the checklist items and your cost to produce is going to be through the roof if you don't get the adoption and the implementation and things like that.
Hmm.
So I think that's where it's like, oh, it's almost a little bit of a mind shift. And so from that perspective, kind of get away from the checklist item. And then beyond that, right? Are we getting the results we're expecting? And
Hmm.
that's the big piece. And that's where it gets a little tough, right? Because before you ever implement the software, it's extremely important to go through and set the baseline. What's our cost to produce? What are our results
Hmm.
today? And then really having great metrics around once you've implemented, how is that changing the metrics? And often we see people like, hey, I've got a friction point here. I want to solve that friction point. I think this technology can do that. And then over time, they don't really have good metrics on did I ultimately solve the problem, or did I just add cost onto an existing problem?
So from what you're saying, then this initial step is looking at realistically your loan process components and understanding the weak points and the issues that need to be fixed. In my experience, maybe you have something different. I don't know that they know that. And so they kind of guess at it, or they do it from how often the loan officers are complaining about something. And that's not necessarily data driven, telling you that you got a problem.
And that kind of, a lot of times
Yeah.
talk about going back to the basics, and the irony is, obviously I love technology, right? It's something I'm very passionate about. The irony is how many times I found recently us talking with my peers and almost reminiscing like the good old days. Like, remember how fast we were with paper files, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I think a lot of that comes to truly getting to the root cause. And I've been victim of this, right? Like, look at an issue, I'm like, oh, this technology can solve for that, without really getting to the root cause. And that's where I think taking the time, getting to the root cause analysis, and a lot of times you'll find that you don't need a technology, right? Process improvement's going to fix it, or you don't need some expensive solution for it, right? And that's where I
Hmm.
think getting back to basics, making sure that the process, it kind of goes back to, you've heard, scale your success, not your mess, right?
Hmm. True,
uh,
true.
and if your process isn't perfected and it's not clean, a lot of these tools are just gonna accelerate the mess, which kind of goes back to our title, right? Which is technology should accelerate a strong process, not compensate for a weak one, because it's an amplifier, right? So if
Yeah.
you have a great process and you're really efficient, it's going to amplify that great process and great efficiency.
So I know you're an analytical, expert. So if you're looking at, it sounds like the cost to produce is kind of the holy grail, which it is. How would you determine is that process efficient? Because most lenders will say it is, and the fact is it may not. So are you looking at the average time to close a loan? Are you looking at, how many loans fall out of closings? I mean, what is it that a lender should think about as being really like, I got a problem?
Yeah, I think the high friction points are
Hmm.
obviously right. I mean, that's kind of the great starting point, and then looking at those friction points and deciding, okay, which ones are kind of low
Hmm.
judgment, because those are often the easiest place to get an ROI and to get pretty good results, because those repeatable, high touch
Yeah.
document handling has come so, such a long way that those end up being really, really effective starting points. But as you get, I would say the short answer is all of those metrics, right? Because you want to know how it impacts your cost to close, right? The faster you get loans to the finish line, the better. The human capital that it takes. And then there's always the soft elements of, does it make my people happier, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Is it easier on them so they can focus on other process? So I think all of those collectively, and some of those are objectively hard to put a number on, but it is important to kind of factor all of those elements.
So, for an independent mortgage banker, as an example, is the comparison that my firm is not doing as well versus my peer group. Is that the starting point that you would see that? Because oftentimes what I see is not a recognition. It's almost like if they complain a lot, then we need to do something. So I'm just saying that we have more data than we need to. I mean, we have a lot of data in our industry now, and what our peers are doing is that becomes like, let's look at our peers because that's an objective standard, and therefore we see this as a problem versus people complaining.
I like the peer study as a starting point, and I think everyone likes to view themselves, differently
Different.
and unique
Yeah.
and everything.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, right, we're creating a widget, and
Yes.
it needs to look the same when we deliver it into the secondary market.
Right.
So from that perspective, the peer study is great, and it's a great place to start, but it needs to work for, all these solutions need to work for your organization. So I think that, as you're getting into the studies, as you're getting into the ROI analysis, it is
Mhm.
important to take that in mind, and again, use it just as a starting.
So let's take a deeper dive. Since you're a capital markets expert and icon, you're really on target all the time. What are the types of things that you identified as a workflow process issue? And then how did you go through to correct it?
So often document handling is
Hmm.
a great starting point, right? So the ability to eliminate a lot of the stare and compare, being able to scrape data from documents, using a lot of the API connectors to load that directly into your LOS. Those are phenomenal solutions. And then what I have found to be one of the most successful is really around pipeline management. Using a lot of the technology and LLM tools to really get robust pipeline management and give that feedback loop to the sales teams. Everyone's busy, right? Things are slipping
Yeah.
through the cracks. So I found a lot of those tools have been extremely successful, almost as a support system for the sales team, so nothing slips through the cracks and they're keeping things moving. And I don't want to say it's a crutch for pipeline management, right? I mean, we should be doing
Hmm.
that on a regular basis, but it certainly helps keep sales teams engaged in their pipeline, and make sure that nothing gets missed.
So with the pipeline side, which obviously is a fundamental within our industry, did you develop these t tools yourself, or are you one to go out to the marketplace and then decide, all right, I can make this enhancement and that enhancement, they can do it better and cheaper and all this other stuff? Kind of what's the process that you've gone through, and what have you seen the biggest lift with?
With AI being more advanced, especially the last 6 months, what I'm seeing is the build versus buy
Yeah,
strategy conversation is changing pretty dramatically. Historically, I've been one to build a lot of those tools
yeah,
in-house, but it was a slow launch, right? It took a
sure.
lot of development hours and a lot of working with the teams to get it right. And what we're seeing with AI speeding development is you're able to build a lot of those tools in-house much faster than historically available. But it's also benefiting the vendors too, right? They are
Hmm.
now building software and tools and solutions much faster than they have historically as well, right?
Hmm.
So the one thing I would caution right now, with things changing as rapidly as they are, is long-term vendor contracts, right? When you start looking at 2, 3, 4, 5 year contracts, who knows where AI, I mean, when we see the advancement over the last 6 months, how
Sure.
quickly we've gotten to where we are today, what's it going to look like in another 6 months?
Yeah, true, very true. So are you one to go to Codex and then you put in what you're trying to do, and this is how you, in essence, come up with the coding yourself? Is that part of what you're doing?
So I use a combination of tools like RPA tools, such as
Mhm.
like UiPath and things like that. A lot of times are very effective. The reason I like those is because they're very application agnostic, so
Mhm.
can move in between systems with ease, have API connectors, and have document recognition software built in. So tools like that I find generally are very effective for general automation and process improvement. But there's a lot of amazing tools out there as well that plug in for very specific problems that you're trying to solve for as well. So
So, what are the secrets or what you have learned? I guess that you found, well, that was not the right way to do it. I'm curious and where we all go through that. And so, what are some of the things that, even talking about the last 6 months, that you learned, well, that doesn't work?
I would say the thing that sticks out the
Yeah,
most is when you do have a different process, right? And you're relying on vendors, right? I mean, vendors, are generally gonna benefit from making a very repeatable process, right? They're gonna
sure.
have and if you are different in a way, or hey, we've got a different process flow, those don't plug in very well, because again, there's a lot of tweaking, a lot of changes that need to happen to work into your workflow. So that's the thing that sticks out most is kind of recognizing, early on that, hey, our process does differ from the industry standard. I need to take that into account early when looking at certain vendors, so that we don't run into the issue down the road where, like, wow,
Mm,
now I'm in a situation where I've spent 6 months implementing. I either have to change my process more to an
right.
industry norm process, or I need to spend a lot of time, effort, and energy with the vendor accommodating our different process.
Well, here's really the hard question, and I'm glad you brought this up, is that if you're deviating from the industry norm, it doesn't mean you're actually doing it better. And so it just means you deviated to accommodate typically what I see, essentially the personnel. And so the deviation could be, well, it's not really a codex issue. It's really that being to the norm is in your first step, is how I would see it. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's kind of two school of thoughts there, right?
Sure.
There's the one side that I think I have a better way to do it, and then there's the I want to be unique to be unique.
Yes,
And of
true.
course the one you
Yeah.
mentioned too, which is, I need to accommodate the team that I have, so we have to
Yes,
deviate for
correct.
that reason. But generally, I think it kind of falls into those two camps. If you're in the camp of, hey, I've got a better way to do it,
Great.
I
Yeah.
think you just have to early on just know that, hey, my reliance on vendors is going to be it has to be less, right? And our
Mhm.
reliance on in-house development is part of this decision. So I think as long as those decisions are together, it generally works out. Where it doesn't work out is like what we talked about before, different by design, but then want to plug in a standard industry standard vendor. That's where you're going to run into a lot of friction.
So if you look at the big picture in our industry, really the standard deviation from the norm has been typically the difference between lenders. But today, with this technology, you are seeing a drive towards faster, quicker, and a standardized approach. Is that off market? I mean, for me, if you're a middle tier lender or a middle tier bank or whatever, and you're in the mortgage space, I mean, even when I saw talked through the other day, we don't even have a CRM. So, I mean, what are you worrying about AI? I mean, so, you know, what's your
Yeah,
thoughts? Yeah.
yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because we're seeing that a
Yeah.
lot, and there's definitely very very good use cases for different business models, right? Like you
Hmm.
mentioned, there's some that don't have a CRM. I know companies that don't want a POS.
Yeah.
They want to
Mm.
focus entirely on face-to-face conversations and really relating to the customer, and that idea of once you send someone to the internet to fill out an application, you're
Hmm.
inviting them to apply with everyone, right? So
Hmm.
there's definitely different schools of thought there, and not to say that anyone's wrong, right? It's
Sure.
great to find a niche in the market. However, it need as organizations start talking about scaling and getting bigger, sometimes you can outgrow that business model pretty quickly. So therein lies kind of the challenge. Like, how do you keep almost how do you accommodate both mindsets? So
So if you had to look out like 5 years from now, I know this is putting on the forecasting side of it. It's the difference between lenders, regardless of the size, is this willingness to fix their workflow, which a lot of times they don't? And then is the differentiation also going to be the technology use, which we talk about it, and certainly that's a hot topic within our market, but in a lot of ways it never gets down to the actual, feet on the street people. And so how do you see this? Are we finally moving into a period where you just can't ignore these things?
You certainly can't ignore it, right? Because
Hmm.
as technology improves and cost per loan starts to decrease over time, and
Hmm.
I kind of like having flashbacks of kind of the early Dodd-Frank days where the joke was we're a compliance company that does mortgages every once in a while, right?
Yeah.
And that was kind of a period of time where the cost to produce ramped up pretty
Hmm.
rapidly. But now we're kind of turning a corner and technology is going to start driving that cost to produce down. And lenders that aren't trying, again, anytime you're a leader, right? I mean, a lot of
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
sayings over the years have been be a fast follower, right? Let someone
Hmm.
else be an innovator and spend the money on innovation. But I do believe it's going to be important to be a fast follower because as cost produce comes down, if you're still trying to, to cover, of course, on a capital market side or the margin
Yeah.
police, right? If you're trying to cover that higher cost to produce, it's going to create a lot of friction with the sales teams. Pretty rapidly. So driving that cost to produce down is going to be something that can't be ignored. The question is going to all come down to getting the right solutions and really making sure you're driving to truly to the bottom line where you need those the biggest lifts.
So, well, I need to have you back and talk about which the implementation side is to me always the biggest issue. So we have wonderful technology, but the point is it doesn't get used a lot. And so under a decentralized sales model, which is what we have, that's the core issue is that, well, one branch A could do it, branch B may not do it. Do you see us moving into a different time frame where we have to get really the sales model right?
I think that'll start to come naturally. Let's use, branch A wants to embrace the new technology,
Yeah.
branch B wants to do it the old way. When they start seeing branch A is closing loans faster,
Hmm.
they're doing it with less headaches, they're not missing their closing
Yes.
dates. That naturally happens. I remember early on when technology really started to take hold, I was struggling with adoption. It
Mhm.
was tough to go to the teams and say, "Hey, we want to implement this new technology in your department. Let's." Implementation was always a challenge. Adoption was always a challenge. But what worked best was, all right, let me demonstrate how this is going to work, right? So I'd always start with automation in my departments,
Yeah.
and then once the other departments were to see that, then
Hmm.
their eyes would light up. They're like, I want that.
Hmm.
And I think on the sales side, that will naturally occur as well.
So we talked about what you've implemented in the capital market side, the secondary mortgage department side. How long did it take you as a general rule, and what lift did you see? Was it if you it took you a while, and then did you get it immediately, or what is that return that you see?
So it really depends on the process. I mean,
Yeah.
there's some of the in-house, PA automation that built over the years, takes 2 or 3 FTE and cuts that down to maybe a quarter FTE, right? So you end up
Sure.
seeing some pretty robust ROIs there and speed improvements. On some of the pipeline management stuff, we're seeing what would take, maybe a user 15, 20 minutes per loan to gather up status information and be able to provide that to the pipeline users now takes a couple seconds, right? So you can start to extrapolate some of those out and really see how rapid some of those improvements are. But really, it's the big lifts that you see, right? In document
Yeah.
handling and underwriting and processing, automating services where that's done for the users, doing the validation checks for the underwriters. So that's done for them, right? So when they're getting the file, it's more of just a double check as opposed to a full underwrite. Those are areas that have the biggest ROI and ultimately are going to speed up the process. And more importantly, cut down on mistakes, right? That ability to lessen errors, have less repurchases, those end up having a very, very significant ROIs.
Well, I have to have you come back and talk some more about some of these issues for sure. We just got into the surface side of it. So, what are a couple takeaways that you would say for our listeners today?
I would say, root cause analysis. That's always going to be first. Process before technology, and it kind of goes back to just before we had technology, it was people, process, and technology. Make sure you have the right people, make sure you have the right process, and last, right, should be the technology. Because again, you try to use technology to fix a broken process. That's where you're just layering expense on top of already a
Yeah.
costly business models.
Yeah. So, Ryan, how can people get a hold of you and to discuss this further?
Well, easiest way is always on LinkedIn. So yeah, connect on LinkedIn and love to have conversations. So
Yeah, well, he definitely answers his emails on his messages on LinkedIn. I can verify that. Ryan, you've been fabulous today. I'm thrilled to have you again talk about this important topic, and we'll have to have you come back because I don't think lenders recognize that this is definitely a new world of origination, and the same old ways don't work. So, I want to thank our listeners for tuning in, and certainly check out our other shows, and certainly check out the Mortgage Manager Mastery book that is now on Amazon with best practices on sales leadership. Thanks, Ryan.
all right, thank you.
Check out my new book, Mortgage Manager Mastery, where 23 mortgage sales leaders shared their best practice in managing sales staff. The book is available on Amazon in Kindle or paperback.